The debt is enormous, $31 trillion. Inflation is at a 40-year high. That's hard on all of us. It's really hard on working families. But the thing that's the worst about our economy, the thing that should scare you to death, so that's economically what's happening. And it really chips away at the whole idea of the American dream.
How are we declining? What are the most pressing issues?
Yeah, there's, I just touched on briefly, let me go a little bit deeper. So if you look in economic terms, what's always been great about the American economy is it's been dynamic. And that means that it's, with capitalism, like businesses go out of business, people lose jobs, but there's new job creation and productivity has driven our economy, and technological leadership has driven our economy over hundreds of years. And we're losing that. We're losing that dynamism in our economy. Let me give you a couple examples. Well, first, the debt is enormous, $31 trillion. And when you have to pay interest on debt, that squeezes out investment and other good things. Inflation is at a 40-year high. That's hard on all of us. It's really hard on working families. Across Pennsylvania, it's really hard on people with a fixed income. During the campaign trail, I pull up to a gas station one day. I get out, there's a guy standing next to me filling up his pickup, and he can't fill it up because it costs $100 to fill up his pickup. He needs it to go back and forth. I mean, if you're on a month, living month to month, the inflation kills you. But the thing that's the worst about our economy, the thing that should scare you to death, is that the whole premise of America has been essentially, no matter where you start, you work hard, have a little luck, take risk, build opportunity, you can get anywhere. So if you're born in the fourth quartile of people economically at the lowest end, you can get to the top. And there's thousands, millions of stories of Americans that have done that. Well, that's increasingly less likely today. The likelihood that you're going to start in the bottom and get to the top is the lowest it's been. And that's why two things. 80% of Americans think the country's going in the wrong direction. And 2/3 of Americans, parents, think their kids are going to be less well off than they are. So that's economically what's happening. And it really chips away at the whole idea of the American dream. From a security perspective, we're losing our way. So China is on the rise. China has a technological capability that is far superior to what it was even 10 years ago. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago that had this think tank in Australia that studied the 44 technologies that matter most to national security and to the economy. Satellites, artificial intelligence, quantum science, things like that. This article, independent think tank, said China is in the lead in 37 of those 44.
In 37?
Disaster, right? Disaster. And there's all sorts of reasons for that we can get into when we talk about China. But our military is at risk. And part of what makes it at risk is the wokeness and the progressivism that's sort of driving the agenda. Let me give you a small example. I know you're a Navy guy, but as an Army guy, the fact that the Army came out with its climate strategy under Joe Biden before it came out with its warfighting strategy is all you need to know. And that's part of the lack of focus on warfighting and the lack of ability to look over the horizon on new platforms that are going to be necessary to win. Those are both big problems, national security, economically.
How do you think these agendas are filtering into the military? Do you think this is China pushing this one way or another?
Well, I think it's a little bit of the third thing I'm about to say, which is the spiritual decay. And I think that this is a war of ideas, and there's a progressive ideology that's chipping away at some fundamental premises about America. It starts in our schools, where our kids are being taught a history of America that is unrecognizable to me. A history of America conceived in evil, the notion, the critical race theory that's the defining narrative of America, when by any measure, America's been the most exceptional country in history in terms of bringing people out of poverty, in terms of a country that was conceived with the idea of liberty for all. The notion that the government is created to support the liberty of the individual. A country that has fought wars to, help others in the case of Hitler and the domination of Europe and the terrible evil that took place there. So America has been a force for good in the world. That doesn't mean that we haven't had our dark chapters of racism and all those things. Of course, that's true. But in overall history, it's been a search for a perfect union, getting better and better, and it's been a great history of accomplishment. That's not the history our kids are being taught. And the reason that's so important is if you don't think America is an exceptional country, then you don't grow up thinking that you have to do everything you can to preserve it. And there's lots of reasons for it. I blame President Obama in some ways. He was the first one that said, America is exceptional, but I bet the Greeks think they're exceptional and the British think they're exceptional. No, it's not the same. America has been a unique contribution to the world. So it starts with that, but that progressive ideology has creeped into business with the hijacking of profit motive and allocation of capital for ESG measures, really cutting away at the notion of merit and profit motive. We see it in the whole DE&I agenda that's driven how decisions are getting made. We see that in not only our business community and our schools, but in our military. So it's a pervasive, I don't think the Chinese are behind it necessarily, but places like TikTok magnify it. And this is one of the reasons I think China has growing confidence and we should be worried, is because you're chipping away at the core of what's made America great. And so the book, we'll talk about this, but the book talks about leadership that reforms those institutions and drives in a direction that gets back to American fundamentals.
You don't think China's behind this pushing propaganda towards critical race, the gender dilemma, whatever you want to call it, all these woke programs? And the reason I'm asking is because you see all these politicians that have businesses in China that could be ripped out from under them at any time.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell, the Bidens, on both sides of the aisle. And nobody that has ties to China seems to be fighting any of this stuff.
Well, I think the best way I'd say it is I think it's in China's interest that this progressive ideology continues to gain traction. And I'm sure China is doing all it can do to magnify it. Okay. But I think at its core, it's hard to understand where the progressive ideology comes from. But at its core, I think, is a lack of appreciation for the uniqueness of America and a set of beliefs that's undermining some very fundamental things about what's made America so great. And so I look at the current polarization in our country and everything else, and I think the important thing about it is what ideas are going to prevail that'll take our country forward. And we can talk about what some of those ideas are, but that's where I'm so worried about the left, because I think it's taking us down a path where if we continue in 10 years from now, we're not going to recognize the country that we all grew up in.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Do you think all the left is into these woke agendas, or do you think it's a small portion of the left? Because it's sold by the right as it's the entire left. I tend to disagree with that personally.
I think it's there's definitely an extreme element of it that's taken it in a very scary direction. If you look in Pennsylvania, for example, which I know best, it's the first time in 76 years that we've had two Democratic senators. And if you look at even the one senator that's there, Bob Casey, the incumbent senator, even he has sort of jumped on board. He's been viewed as more of a mainstream, more of a conservative Democrat or moderate Democrat. He's adopted and gone full circle with the policies of Joe Biden and where the left's taken us. And I think that, when you go in business circles and talk to people who are Democrats, where I come from, I'm a business guy, they'll say, man, this has gone way too far. But I think the far left is so vicious that if they speak up, they're going to get crucified. So I'm inclined to agree with you that it's the extreme that's pulling it in that direction. But that extreme has had a disproportionate amount of influence on the agenda of the Biden administration, on business leaders, and I think that's part of what we have to push back against.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.